I'm really excited to introduce our friend, the best-selling food writer and author, and chair of Tasted Food Education Charity, Bea Wilson. Bea's new book, The Secret of Cooking, is going to be out in spring 2023, but she's also going to be signing her current bestseller at our drinks reception and book signing in the hall at the end of the afternoon, so don't miss that. Bea is going to be in conversation with one of our long-time food heroes, Dan Barber. I'm very excited. I think we've been pursuing him for years to come and be part of Fixing the Future, and I'm really, really thrilled he was able to and agreed to join this conversation with Bea today. She will tell you more about Dan. After Bea and Dan's conversation, she's going to pass over to Judith Càlix, who's an author and the director of Cuina, Catalonia's leading food magazine. So you're in for a super inspiring part 1 and part 2 of this session. You are in excellent hands as always, and I'll hand over to Bea. Thank you.
Hi. So, Dan is going to appear virtually, but I'm first going to introduce him. So I'm not quite sure what he will be seeing at this point, but I hope that he can see something. The Dan Barber has been described as a kitchen philosopher. He's one of the very few chefs in the world who has as many fans for his writing and his activism as he does for his cooking. His book, The Third Plate, field notes on the future of food, and you can see from the number of post-it notes and how well thumbed it is, how many times I return to this book. It's one of the most thought-provoking and, I would say, essential food books you'll ever read. Oh, here's Dan. Hi. Yay. We can't hear you. Can you see me? I can see you.
I can see you, and I can hear you too. Can you hear me now?
Fantastic. And I can now hear you too. So I'm still introducing you. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, don't let me interrupt. It's beautiful.
No. So Ruth Reichel said of Dan's book, The Third Plate, Dan Barber asks questions that nobody else has raised about what it means to be a chef, the nature of taste, and what sustainable really means. He challenges everything you think you know about food. It will change the way you eat. Dan is the executive chef. We've now lost Dan again. Dan is the executive chef and co-owner of Farm to Table Blue Hill and the Green Michelin-starred Blue Hill at Stone Barns in New York. But that's only the start. Both in and out of the kitchen, Dan has been a force for radical change, completely redefining the relationship between farms and restaurants, farmers and chefs. He's long been known as the greatest pioneer of the farm-to-table movement in the US. And during the 2 and a bit years of the pandemic, he's established a series of projects which call into question the very future of the restaurant. But I think we should start by talking about seeds, Dan. Why are seeds so important and so neglected?
Well, I have to start with your new book, Bea. what's the secret to cooking?
Okay, I do have a one.
Just tell us, I'm gonna throw it right back at you. What's the secret to cooking?
Throw it right back at me. I do have a one-sentence answer to that. So I'd been thinking of writing a cookbook for a while. We're here to talk about you, Dan. You're too modest. Stop it.
I know, but I want to hear the secret.
I will quickly tell you.
She threw it out there, and it's so tangible. First, I didn't know you were writing another book, so we have to hear this.
Yeah, I had been planning to write a cookbook for a while, and then I got very interested in looking at the kind of cookbooks that, well, you know all about this. Dan knows all about the history of food as well. But the books that existed before cookbooks, which were sometimes referred to as books of secrets, and as you know, they didn't just include recipes for food, they would include a cure for baldness, or something that you could take which would comfort the heart and cure melancholy, and it would probably just consist of some borage juice kind of ground up, and you might add some rose petals to it. And whether that cures melancholy or not, I don't know, but there's something lovely about it. So then I thought, oh, secrets, the secret of cooking. And I thought, somebody's definitely called a book that before. They haven't. So I thought of the title before I really thought of the concept.
Beautiful.
And then I thought,
Beautiful.
what is the secret of cooking? I don't know the secret of cooking. I'm not a chef like you. I'm just a home cook. I'm mostly just rushing around after my kids trying to get something on the table. And then I thought, the secret of cooking is the person who cooks. And I think that is true, regardless, isn't it? So, I mean, the kind of cooking you're going to do, the kind of cooking you do is going to be completely different from the kind of cooking I do. It's going to be different if you're disabled, if you're old, if you have lots of time and you're desperate to cure a busy mind, or if you feel you have no time and you'd like to make some kind of delicious pre-made sauce that you could put in the freezer. Anyway, that's my book. Let's stop talking about me and talk about
Well,
you.
Thank you for going off script.
Yeah, but seeds. I wanted you to tell me.
Seeds. Listen, I've just got off a plane from Utah. I was in the Wasatch Mountains. Have you ever been to the Wasatch Mountains of Utah? I mean, it's about an hour from Salt Lake City. It's where you land in Salt Lake City. And it's just this canvas of mountains that are impressive. But anyway, I went to see a breeder named Joseph Lofthouse, who unlike you, B, I don't have a pithy way to do anything, and it's really hard to distill what I was just experiencing for the last 24 hours. I've literally just got off a plane, but the work that I went to see him because he's a seed breeder that is doing something unlike anyone I've ever met, and I think it goes to answer your question. Although this isn't an elevator pitch, we're gonna take the stairs, as they say, and first of all, he's somebody who has devoted his life to poverty. So it's important, not just a detail that's interesting, but also important to the breeding work, because it's freed him. And what I've learned about seed breeding, I actually know very little, but what I've learned is that the goal when you breed a seed, when you are creating a new variety of a vegetable or a grain, you have a goal in mind, and the goal is for 80% of our food supply, 80% of seeds that are produced, they're owned by 4 companies. 60%, but it's growing very rapidly. And if you include some other companies, you get up to 80 very quickly. So there's a handful of companies that essentially control our food supply. And they have, to a large extent, one goal in mind, which is to make money. And so you are locked into this kind of path of creating a variety that produces a lot in an acre, right? Mm. That's what it comes down to. So here I am in the Wasatch Mountains with Joseph Lofthouse, somebody who's committed himself to poverty. I'm walking these rows of tomatoes, which is what I first came across, what I really came to. I came to the tomatoes because he's doing a project he calls promiscuous tomato breeding. And it's about forcing genetics in an environment that is just a cornucopia of expression. So there is no goal. I mean, he's not allergic to yield to a fruit like a tomato producing a lot. It's not that is anathema to him. He's not about an heirloom particular type of thing that you put a gold fence around. It's not that. But it's also 100 other things. 1,000, 10,000 things. I literally was walking through a field with expressions that were 10,000 plus in just a small little area of tomatoes. So you are walking down a row and you'll see a tomato that's this size and a tomato that's this size, and it's on the same vine.
That's amazing.
And what he's doing is introducing the oldest the wild tomatoes from Peru, and marrying them with the most modern, Monsanto varieties to explode the possibilities. It's like a Thanksgiving table with the crazy cousins, plus. And the idea is to create more and more weirdness and more bricolage of genetic expression. And it is so crazy. I taste in the span of 3 minutes, I tasted the worst tomato of my life.
What did it taste
and
like?
I tasted,
Describe the worst.
It tasted like I tasted burned rubber, actually, which is what came to my mind, and a like a tar-like thing that I couldn't even eat it. And then 3 or 4 minutes later, I was a couple of feet away. I had the best tomato of my life, and I almost cried. And I still am tasting it now. And let me just describe this to you. It tasted like meat that had been hung to that for like that beautiful rottiness, but in a way that is just haunting. I mean, it was like tasting a like an 82 Bordeaux that has that permanence. Like it's like I was breathing that tomato out for like the next half an hour. It was
so umami,
the craziest thing I've ever had.
And so it had a lot of umami.
I mean, umami. I mean, it like umami makes it sound like it. You know. Yeah. I mean, no. It had this rich umami bomb. It was a bomb in my mouth, and it kept going. And I was literally breathing out like 5 minutes. I think I can still taste it, and it's 12 hours later.
Okay, so you've done a great job here, Dan, of telling us why seeds are exciting, but we want to hear about your work with seeds.
Well,
can I get you back on
work? Because
this is your work. But can you tell us about
on the plane? That's the project I went to see. This is a promiscuous tomato that has come out of this bricolage. So here you have this universe of diversity, and within it, you're trying to find things like this. And this is a beautifully rich, delicious tomato that is now a stable seed, which I have a seed company called Row 7, and we're hoping to run with this as a variety that has good yield, but it has amazing disease resistance. This has not been raised in a chemical environment. You know, our seeds are. We talk a lot about farming and monocultures and large agribusiness and all the chemicals that are meant to be applied to make our food grow. This is a tomato that is meant to grow on its own. It's been raised in a Rambo environment. You know, it's had to survive not just among its cousins and black sheeps of the family, but also in conditions that are very harsh. It's very short growing season. It's very cold. There's already 3 frosts by the time I got there. These are put through a kind of a torture process, and the survivors are the ones that are chosen. So they have the resistance to everything that nature can throw at them within reason. They yield well, so that farmer can make some money. This is, again, not an heirloom, not something that our grandmothers passed down and that, yield a couple per acre. And the flavor is fantastic. So it's this win for everybody, except the chemical companies. And I forgot to mention that of the 60+% companies that own our food supply, they're all chemical companies. We forget the chemical companies have bought the seed companies. So their imperative is to add the chemicals and make the money. And here is an opposite view of the future.
So your own seed company that you've begun mentioning, I mean, one of the big themes, both in your written work and your work as a chef and an activist, is this theme which you've already kind of alluded to, which is that the big companies, for these economic reasons that you've already suggested, they simply don't breed for flavor. And what you're doing is flipping it around and saying, what would it look like if actually, alongside all of these other metrics that farmers need, as you said, farmers need to make money, they do need yield, they need plants that are going to survive. But you've described it as, what if you could breed vegetables for jaw-dropping, mind-blowing flavor? But you've also made experiments with wheat. I mean, you're one of the first people I can ever remember writing about wheat in a way that made me think, oh, I've just completely taken this substance for granted and never even asked what it is. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, well, I had a conversation with a wheat breeder 15 years ago, a really off the cuff, innocent conversation, because at that point, 15 years ago, I was an evangelist for heirlooms, and heirlooms again are these coveted seeds that you pass down through generations, filled with nostalgia, filled with this awe, because they taste good, which is crazy, actually, when you start to think about it. And this is what this breeder told me 15 years ago. I had a variety of wheat called Aragon 3 from Spain, Western Spain. There is one family now still growing Aragon 3, and I was desperate to get that wheat because it made the most delicious bread I had ever baked, and I was desperate to get it growing here in the United States. And the breeder, this guy, Dr. Steve Jones, said to me, yeah, I could get Aragon 3 for you, but I could also make it better. And I never forget the chutzpah, as my grandfather would say, about somebody who would say something about an heirloom that had been passed down for generations, that he could actually make it better. I always thought modern breeding, just, everything bad about breeders today is that they make food terrible, and they concentrate on yield, and they require lots of chemicals. When in fact, that is true because 60 to 80% of our food supply is owned by the people who want that as a part of our food system. But if you talk to people who don't have that as their imperative, it becomes very interesting. And so we, Dr. Steve Jones and I, embarked on a project, and unwillingly, by the way, on my part, I did it because he was so adamant. He grew out the Aragon 3, but he also crossed Aragon 3. He took Aragon 3 and he married it. He actually menaged a trois it to a couple of other varieties. And out in a span of a few years came Barber wheat. And that was the beginning of my understanding that we need a seat at the table, chefs and people who like food. Because when we have a seat at the table, we demand what you just posed your question with, flavor. Flavor should be at the forefront. Flavor is not the only thing, but flavor needs to be the driving force. And right now, we don't have a seat at the table. And right now, flavor is an accident if it happens at all.
And wheat is something where if you could change wheat, in a sense, you could change everything about the food system, right? I mean, you've written about the fact that...
Well, in the Western world, I think that's right. I think in the Western...
I'm going to quote something from
in
your
the Western
book.
Hemisphere, I think there is wheat as we all know, wheat is the grown on the most acres.
Yeah, grown on the most acres, and you say
And,
in the US, it constitutes a large percentage of our diet, more than 130 pounds per person every year. That's more than beef, lamb, veal, and pork put together. It's more than poultry and fish too. If you don't count corn sweeteners, we eat more wheat than every other cereal combined. But then the other thing is that the vast majority of the wheat produced, it's got a whole input-output problem, hasn't it? That the wheat is bred in order that it can only grow with huge amounts of fertilizer and pesticide. But then in terms of what it goes on to produce, it's basically a sort of bland fodder which gets transformed in 1,000 different ways in the ultra-processed food industry. And it's refined, and it's bleached, and it's milled, and it reaches us in a form that's beyond all human recognition. So somehow... I was fascinated by the idea that by starting with wheat, you could sort of begin in some way, in some benign way, to start changing a lot of other things.
Well, if you were going to do if you had a magic wand in the Western world, I'd start with wheat. If I was in Asia or the East, I'd probably start with rice. And in the South, I'd probably start with corn. But as long as we're talking about wheat, yes, I think what you just said is exactly right. We've taken one of the most healthy grains pound for pound in a seed, and commodified it and dumbed it down to a substrate, so that a white flour is tasteless. And the results have been an enormous impact on our environment, because wheat is the #1 grown crop by acreage, and an enormous impact on our health, because we're not meant to eat white flour in the way that we do, and as a big part of our diet. So what I was advocating for at the beginning was this journey of figuring out, well, how do you breed a variety of wheat that restores flavor like that Aragon 3, but modernizes it so that you're not taking genetics from our grandparents, but that you are recognizing that there are new pathogens in the air, and there is new imperatives for yield, and there's new imperatives for where you grow wheat, where you don't have a lot of water, and et cetera. You can select genetics that are appropriate to place instead of a one-size-fits-all. And when you start to do that, you get a regional variety of wheat that is expressive of place. That's very important. That's in the seed. But then the second part of it is, well, to express that flavor that you've taken the time to create, you have to mill it. You have to cook it in a way that does justice to that. What we have done in our dumbed down commodified system is create a substrate that has no flavor. So one way to look at restoring wheat is to think about it as the fresh product. We don't. We think about it as it sits on your shelf. But what if we thought of wheat in the way that we think of an orange? Would you have an orange juice that you squeezed 8 months before you had your breakfast, morning breakfast, orange juice? No. You would squeeze it the morning you have it. And maybe we should start to think about wheat in that same way, because when you mill a whole grain of wheat, the volatiles are even more volatile than an orange, actually. And so those flavors and that nutrition can be captured through milling. So it's seed breeding, but then it's on the other side is the cooking. And that's why the correspondence between the breeding, the farming, and the cooking is the ultimate realization of deliciousness.
So staying with the theme of cooking, I can already tell there's too many aspects of your work for us to cover them before I have to go to audience questions in 10 minutes. But Resource Ed, of all the pandemic forced, well, pretty much every restaurant in the world to pivot at extremely short notice to a different model of hospitality. The past couple of years have been the toughest in history for anyone working in the business. But I got the sense from observing from social media what you're doing, you seem to have pivoted further and faster and more radically than anyone. And can you tell us a bit about Resource Ed, what it is, what it started off doing? By the way, if anyone follows Dan on social media, or if you don't already, you should. And if you look on his Twitter account, and if you go back to May 2020, there is an incredibly moving and beautiful video about Resource Ed at the beginning and chefs becoming farmers. And we were hoping to get it up. We didn't succeed. So, but you can all go and watch that in your spare time.
Okay, thank you. The resource was started as because our restaurant was shut, as all of us were, and we were packing up meals, and I just didn't want to do meals that were to go that didn't have any connection to how food was grown. And it seemed to me quickly that there was an opportunity, because people were at home and they were not going into work, to actually have a moment where you could read something and you could learn about what you were eating. That was a rare moment. It seems so long ago, but I had this thought right when we were shut down that there was an opportunity here for people to experience food in a way that they never had before and maybe never would again. And so we created Resourced as resource education. So here's a box of resources, a pantry, or even prepared food, and both. But overlaid that was enormous information and stories about what you're about to eat, and connections of why we put them together in the box.
So it was a box of ingredients, a box of ingredients that came with some stories and descriptions of the land and where it came from. And tell us a bit more about what you'd get in a resourced box.
Yeah, well, you'd get you get a prepared meal. We started with, we were up to dozens of boxes, but you'd have prepared foods, and overlaid to prepared foods. You'd have pantry items of fresh milled flour. And so look, we were just talking about wheat. We'd have a kit for you to bake bread at home. But we'd have a story about the wheat that you were working with, and a story about the starter that you're working with. And we created a connection, or we allowed people to see the connection between the food they were going to eat and where it came from and how it was grown. And that's the kind of thing that we actually do in our restaurant. When you come to eat here, it's what you get. You can't just come and eat here. You come and eat here with those stories and those connections. That's our shift here. But we tried to capture that in a box and called it Resourced. So it's funny. It seems so long ago now, but I'm glad you're raising it, because it reminds me that what's possible in the work of a restaurant, which is, we think of restaurants as places of escape from our busy and harried lives. But what if we started to think about restaurants as places of connection, connection to the world around us, connection to food, but also just biology and biological systems. You could be sitting in a restaurant in the middle of Manhattan, and you could have a direct connection to the world around you in a very interesting way. And I don't know that we've explored that enough in restaurants. And Resource was a light bulb moment for me, as if I needed one, but I've had many of them, but it reminded me again and again that connection to food is part of the pleasure of eating, and utterly important as we confront the challenges for the future.
So I guess another of the connections is that you've explored subsequently has been the human connections between chefs, and your Chefs in Residence program, which again, all I've seen is just little glimpses on social media, but it just looks amazing and so joyous. And there's a kind of generosity and respect of the way you're writing about these other chefs who are coming to Blue Hill, and you're working alongside them. And there's just a sort of infectious excitement that you seem to enjoy the company of other chefs and sometimes learning things from the ways they're doing things differently. Could you just tell us a bit more about that?
That's exactly it. You said it. I mean, Resource was me, educating and making connections. And as we all, realized during the pandemic, when we had a moment to think, was there another way to look at this food, or was there another way to look at one's life? I mean, that's what I said. We all had these thoughts, and my thought was, I wanted to stop talking, I enjoy sharing information and enjoy sharing about breeders who are creating the future of food. But I also wanted to learn what other cultures have done with these ideas. And so we created the residency program really out of Resource, which was, let's do the same thing as Resource, but let's do it from a completely different perspective. From a Native American perspective, from a Mexican, indigenous Mexican perspective, from an African. I mean, I knew nothing about African food. Western African foodways are just fascinating, and so we invited. That was our first chef, a West African chef, who took over the kitchen. At first, it was Resource, it was a box program, but then we opened because we were allowed to open, and he took over our kitchen and trained our staff on West African foodways, and we served these meals to a limited audience. But it was just he was the first of 9 chefs. But you got an understanding of the same ingredients we use here as the same farm, and we're in the same environment, but it was used in such different ways that it was mind altering, actually. And I had 9 of those experiences over the course of 9 months. So it was a fascinating opportunity for me and my cooks and my team to travel the world without moving.
So this is my last question, and then I'm going to go to the audience. So you've done all of these, almost my last question. I did have another one, but anyway, we'll see how the time goes. You've done all of these remarkable things. You've done such a huge amount to start the kind of positive change in the food system that's so desperately needed, and which this entire 2-day conference, Fixing the Future, is about. But your work at Blue Hill has also been periodically subject to some quite intense scrutiny and criticism. And it strikes me that at the root of some of the criticism seems to be the thought that Blue Hill, which we somehow wanted to be a utopia, is not actually perfect, well, because nothing is perfect. And it strikes me that maybe this raises bigger questions about the search for a bigger food system. As a society, I wonder whether we sometimes are judging change makers and reformers in a harsher and less forgiving way than we do the big multinational food companies we've already referenced, who are continuing to wreak so much harm and havoc on both human health and the planet. Do you have any reflections on this?
Yes, I mean, I have a lot, but to keep it brief. I think what I learned is that when I was building Blue Hill and starting out, I was under a tremendous amount of pressure, and I knew the kind of restaurant I wanted to have, and I knew the kind of communication I wanted to do for our diners. But I was under the influence of reality, which was of trying to make money and survive. And at that point, I didn't know that I could. And I created a lot of pressure for myself and my team, and I pushed the team very, very hard. I still do. I mean, we still do. You can see my cooks are coming in now, and they were here till 2 o'clock in the morning. So we still work very hard. But I think what I have been called out for recently, to the extent that it's correct, is an environment that was unforgiving for some people that I could have recognized, and I should have as a leader. And I really regret that. I really regret that, because at the end of the day, I created that environment that led to people who were working incredibly hard and gave up a lot to come to my kitchen and work with me, and felt that they were let down. And
how are you changing it? How are you changing it now?
Me.
Dan, how are you changing it now?
So out of the pandemic, this has nothing to do with, you're referencing a recent article that came out. We made these changes when we reopened the restaurant. And the changes are, we are open now 3 days a week. We are only doing one service. We used to do 2 services a night, 6 days a week. So 5 days a week, sorry. We used to do 2 services. So in other words, the cooks were here from 9 in the morning, really until 1 or 2 in the morning, every day. And it was a very intense environment. So I've cut the number of people we serve by half. I've cut the kitchen staff down a bit coming out of, we reopened with the less of a kitchen staff. And we are doing just 3 days a week. And the 2 days a week, we are doing events where there's a set menu, and we are doing research and development for our cooks to just learn and pursue ideas that they are interested in. And I'm trying to do that under an environment where we raise money actually to help pay for it. It's a very different environment here. It's not less intense, and it's not less of a drive for perfection, not that we ever realize it. And that was what I missed when I was younger. When I was younger, I was raised in an environment that dictated that drive, and that pursuit of perfection comes at an extreme cost, under extreme pressure, mental and physical. And what I've realized is that you can both be intense about an environment and about the results, but also be much more loving and democratic and encouraging. And unfortunately, it was too late of a revelation for me to not be called out for it. So I blame myself, but I have made a lot of changes, and Blue Hill has made a lot of changes in pursuit of recognizing that what we did in the past was not sustainable and not right.
And I think that segues perfectly into my final question, but then I'm very aware I need to leave room for the audience to answer things. But I guess, I mean, what you've just reflected on there very thoughtfully is that the restaurant is an institution which is in a state of flux, and people in the UK where I live, like Asma Khan has just been one of the most amazing voices talking about how do you do a kitchen, just how you described it, how do you do a kitchen in a more loving and humane way and make everyone feel equal and pay the kitchen porter the same as you pay the chefs, and somehow make it a beautiful space in which food can still come out and money can still be made. But you've alluded to one of the ways in which you are reinventing the restaurant, which is these lovely experiments, which I didn't fully understand that they happen on set days of the week. But again, if you don't look at Dan's Instagram and Twitter, like it blows your mind, some of this stuff. And there was this one you did this summer where you were making it. Well, there was one that was like soup dumplings, but tomatoes nixtamalized. I don't even fully understand that. Some beautiful whole wheat pasta was the latest one. But you did guacamole, but instead of being made out of avocados, which, as we know, are so delicious, but the avocado trade in Mexico is leading to, well, I was going to say mafia style, but it is actually mafia behavior and terrible human suffering and great unsustainability. You made a sort of guacamole out of avocado squash. Can you just end by telling us about that? And then I'm going to give the audience a chance to ask you things. There
is a squash that is called an avocado squash because it's shaped exactly like an avocado. So, I love the flavor because it is one of those squashes that is a crossover between a summer squash and a winter squash. A winter squash has less seeds, it has less water, and it is fattier in the mouth. And so it led me to think about, and our team to think about how we could go in that direction. And we started accentuating it with oil and olive oil, and all of a sudden there was a fattiness to the squash that was really appealing and reminded us actually of avocado. And here you have the shape of a squash that's in an avocado. So we went with that and added, then it's like a luge when you get there, because you just go straight and you're with cilantro and you're with lime juice and pickled, onions a little bit, and all of a sudden you have a guacamole. So yes, it was one of those R&D experiments that you have the space devoted to it. So where you can make lots of mistakes and you can say really stupid things and feel free. And that's actually a luxury. And that's what I've created. And I want to dig into as we move forward and face some of the challenges that we have in the world, health challenges and environmental challenges that are complex and constantly evolving. But it seems to me that restaurants could be places where some of these ideas are generated for the betterment of both.
Thank you so much. We have 5 minutes left. I'm sorry to have taken up so much time. I could just talk to you all day, but I'm sure there are audience questions.
What's the name?
Sorry, I am squinting. And I can't see. Are they going around with microphones? Is there anyone? Put your hand up very high if there is a question. Yes, there's someone over there. I'll repeat it because you might not be able to.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for recognizing it's not always easy for a leader to recognize when they've done something or treated people maybe not in the best way. So thank you so much for that. I think it's really good and really humbling to see someone like you opening about that. I wanted to ask you about your seeds experiments and investigation, and how do they kind of match up with biodiversity? Because I think we're working a lot now on crossing seeds, and I know usually it's done for yield, and you were talking about flavor, which is kind of flipping it and much better in a way. But how do you think that could affect biodiversity, and could we, in a way, corrupt it in the same way that when we went for yield, we would end up just getting, sticking to the tomato that has the most flavor and that being the only tomato we want?
It's a really great question. And I'm sorry we have so little time, but I'll answer you in the nod to reality of time, not because I wouldn't like to talk about this for a long time. But what's amazing about flavor is twofold. What I've learned. Number one is selecting for the kind of flavor that we all want to experience again and again is also selecting for nutrition. So nutrition and flavor are are quite literally the same thing. Flavonoids are flavors, and that is nutrition. And when you look at a map of genetic possibilities, when you're on your way to selecting a variety, the pathways for nutrition and flavor are parallel, actually. So that's number one. But to your question, I want to just say, if you become too fixated on that, I actually don't think there's a problem with it. And I'll tell you why. It's funny, I would always hedge on this, but I'm becoming a little bit more adamant that if flavor is the single focus, the way that you avoid the pitfall of what you are saying, which is, well, if we select this tomato and it's the most delicious tomato, and then we just grow thousands of acres of monoculture of it, won't we just be doing the same thing that we're doing now? And the answer is no, because you cannot get this flavor in a monoculture of 10,000 acres, and this tomato won't grow in a monoculture of 10,000 acres. It won't grow well. What we need to do is create seeds that give a nod to the reality of an environment. And biodiversity is the number one criteria for growing really delicious food. Really delicious food only comes from an ecosystem that is incredibly diverse. That is absolute. And so if your paradigm, if you stick hard and true to deliciousness, and we have to be trained for what is real deliciousness. And I think there is a way to do that. And B is doing it starting at the elementary school level, which is where we should start. But if we stick hard and true to that, we are forced into a diverse system. We cannot, impossible to do it in a monoculture. And that is the blessing, is that if people are willing to seek out and pay a little bit more for a memorable tomato, which apparently people in the United States anyway are, you are going to force a food system that is much more complex than it is now. And that is why I spend my time on seeds, because if we're talking about changing the world and creating a food system that we all want for the future, seeds are the template for which everything runs. If a seed is developed where a 10,000 acre monoculture is possible, then that's where we'll go. And if people are accepting of the flavor of a tomato that's in a 10,000 acre monoculture, then that's where we'll go. But if we create a seed because people are demanding of something like this tomato, then everything else that comes afterwards, the farming principles, the type of farming, the processing, the distribution, the whole system unfolds in a very different way. But it has to start with the seed, because the seeds are the operating instruction for everything that happens afterwards. And so I do actually cling to flavor in this maniacal way, because the rest of the food system unfurls in a way that will support it if we are as energetic and passionate about it as we should be.
That's a wonderful line on which to end. Dan, thank you so much. I'm sure the audience will join me. Thank you. It's just been a joy.
Thank you, everybody.
An honor.
Enjoy the conference. Thank you.
It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
And now we hand over.
Thank you
to the
so
next.
much. That it kills me to end conversations like that. You carry on for 5 hours, please. That would be amazing. That was so wonderful. Thank you, Dan, if you're still listening, so much for doing that, and B, as always, for your expertise and for your kind heart in the way that you do that. And I'm thrilled now to hand over to another wonderful writer, food lover, expert, and somebody else with joy in their heart for food, Judith Càlix.
Hello, how are you? Estoy muy feliz, estaba así pensando.
Hello, I'm very happy. I was thinking, because we agreed between the two speakers and myself that we would speak in Spanish, because Gabriel is from Peru, he's been in Barcelona for a while, and Yes, we'll do so, despite the fact that Martina and myself may drop some Catalan words here and there. So, very happy to be here moderating the next talk in this third Fixing the Future Festival. Thank you so very much for being here. I am very happy to see this attendance, and I'm impressed by the speakers that we just heard from B. Wilson, who I admire so much, Dan Barber, also an example of reference in the more natural cuisine. And I wanted to start by asking you a question. Do you think food and cuisine can be a driver of social and economic change and they can contribute to a better world? I am convinced that it can. I'm positive. I am in the food world, gastronomy, and all over the world we find small movements that work, doing their bit in networks of farmers, producers, cooks, who can locally get changes that I think will be very important to transform. They will be powerful and transformative, and they will affect and have a global impact in our general future and in the food sector specifically. Let's see what you think about that after hearing from our guests. First, I wanted to introduce Martina Puigvert. She comes from La Garrotxa, Girona. She is the head chef of Les Cols restaurant, a family-owned restaurant opened by her parents. What year was that? 32 years ago. If you don't know it, you should go there sometime. First, because of the food they offer, and of course, this is a restaurant with 2 Michelin stars. There aren't that many in Catalonia. And also, because it's a culinary oasis in an architectural environment which is one of a kind. And also the natural environment is beautiful. If you follow Martina, as I do, on Instagram, you will see that all of the posts talk about her links to the territory and how she loves the place where she comes from. At Las Cos, from the beginning, when her parents started, they've been working with proximity products, but radically so. Something that is very fashionable now. They did it a long time ago. The area where they keep the hens and the orchard, well, you can see it from the restaurant if you're dining there, and that space is the heart of the restaurant. It's the key point, and this is the way in which they express their love for the land, for sustainable cuisine, and something I like very much, which is the name non-traveled foods that have not even gotten into a van to get to the kitchen of the restaurant. Martina, after studying at the Basque Culinary Center and working in restaurants all over the world. I think you worked with Dan Barber as well, yes. She came back home and I always say that this restaurant is a women's club. She has 2 sisters, her mom is working there, her dad is in the dining hall as well, but when you see all of them there, it's like this feminine energy. And at some point they saw that the vegetable garden and the farm that they had was not enough so as to implement the philosophy of the restaurant that they wanted to project. And they decided, just a few minutes walk from the restaurant, they purchased some plots of land, and there they grow local seeds of
Alforfón
maíz.
They grow buckwheat, maize,
También tuvieron la oportunidad en
and
este
they
espacio
had the opportunity in this space
de mayores
to
dimensiones
have
y de
a bigger
un gallinero,
vegetable
pues,
garden and a bigger farm.
con mayor capacidad. Todo este proyecto se
And
emplaza
all
en
of this
los
project
campos del I+D,
takes
de
place
lo que se
in
llama
the
Casa
R&D
Horitzó de la Vall de la
fields of
Bianya,
Casa
que
Horitzó in Val de Bianya,
ahora
the
sí que es
Bianya
el
Valley,
motor
which is the
que insuffla
driver
energía al
that
restaurante,
injects energy
y que
into the
está,
restaurant now,
en el parque
and
natural de
which
la
is
zona
in
volcánica
the
de la
natural
Garrotxa. Si
park
visitáis
of the
el restaurante, me
volcanic
parece
area of La
que,
Garrotxa. I
verdad
think
que
if you visit the
permitís las
restaurant,
visitas, y es un
you
espacio muy
allow
interesante.
tours of the
Pero bueno,
estate, right?
yo
Yes, and
quería
it's a
que ella
very
nos explicara este
interesting
proyecto,
thing. I would like for her
en
to
que
tell us about this project,
la economía circular
in
y los
which the
residuos
circular economy and
conseguir
waste
residuo cero es
and
tan importante.
zero waste is so important.
Y bueno, y como dijo el
And
otro día Michel
as
Bra en Andorra, que
Michel Bra said
coincidimos,
the other day when we
que
met,
bueno, que ya los grandes chefs dicen, ¿no?
big chefs
Es que
now
ahora toca ya
are saying
volver a
now
las
it is
estaciones, a
time
escuchar
to
el
go back
campo.
to the seasons,
Que
listening
vosotros
to the
eso sabéis
land.
mucho y ahora lo
And you know a
veremos.
lot about that, and
Cuando
we'll
quieras,
see this
Martina.
now. You have the floor, Martina.
Bueno, un placer estar
Well,
aquí.
it is a pleasure to be
Muchísima
here.
ilusión
I'm very
poder
excited
compartir un trocito
to
de nuestro
share
proyecto
a
aquí
piece of the
con
project
vosotros y además
here
en un
with
evento
you,
tan
especially at
interesante.
such an interesting event as this one.
Si os parece, vamos a empezar con un
We
vídeo
will
que
start
refleja
with a
un
video
poco
that
nuestra filosofía y nuestra
shows
manera de
our
entender
philosophy and
la
our way of understanding gastronomy.
Bueno, el restaurante Les Cols, como
At the Las
está
Cols
ubicado en La
restaurant,
Garrotxa.
as Judith said, it's in La Garrotxa. This is Casa Horizonte, where we have the vegetable garden and the farm and the R&D of Las Cols restaurant.
Un proyecto en el que siempre
This
hemos
is a
intentado
project
apostar por el producto
in
local,
which
el
we've always
alimento no
gone for
viajado,
local products,
intentando,
non-traveled
pues,
foods, and
escuchar la
also
naturaleza y
trying to
respetar
listen to
el
nature and
de las
respecting the
estaciones.
immutable
Este año, para poder ver un poco dónde nos
cycle of the
encontrábamos y
seasons.
poder
And this year, in order to
avanzar
see where we were and
en
to
este
move
sentido, creando un
forward,
horizonte más verde, más
creating a
sostenible,
greener and more
hicimos
sustainable
un
horizon,
estudio
we conducted a
con
survey with the help of
de gente pues, que se dedica a eso
people
y
who were
en este
experts in
estudio
this,
vimos un poco
and
el
in
impacto
this
que tenían nuestras acciones en
study
el
we saw the
restaurante.
impact of our
Bueno,
actions on
resumidamente
the
vimos un
restaurant,
poco
and
el
as a
impacto que
summary
tienen
we
nuestras
saw the
acciones
impact of our
que
actions.
la entrada de recursos, bueno,
So the
básicamente era
income
energía,
of
agua y
resources
alimentos,
basically
y a lo
was
que se refiere a
water,
las salidas había las emisiones de
food and
CO2,
energy, and
el agua de
the
saneamiento,
outgoing
la
products was
generación de
CO2,
residuos.
sanitation, water,
Nuestro
generation of
objetivo un poco
waste.
era
So our
mejorar en
goal
todos
was
estos
to
aspectos y
improve
sobre
in all
todo
of
saber
these
dónde nos encontrábamos.
areas and knowing where
Y
we
ahí
were
vemos, bueno,
basically.
el diagrama
And here in
metabólico
this
de abajo es el del
metabolic
restaurante,
chart at
Les
the bottom, we
Cols, y ahí
see
vemos que hay
the chart of
líneas
the
muy
restaurant
finas,
Las
estas
Cols, and
reflejan un
we
poco
see
nuestras
very
prácticas
thin lines.
sostenibles.
These are our sustainable
Y
practices.
luego las que retornan
And
sería
then
un
the
poco
ones
también
that
esta circularidad que
return
intentamos
are this
buscar
circularity that
en
we we strive for at Las Cols. In terms of energy, for example, the fact that we are in a 15th century farmhouse with thick walls, we can store heat and cold better with a lower carbon footprint. Water we use irrigation water, well water, to recirculate water in a very positive manner. And then our strength would be in the kitchen mainly. We use all of the waste from the restaurant for composting. Vegetable waste helps us reduce the waste of the restaurant a lot, the volume of waste, and this has been very positive. And the goal is to go from this system, from this linear system, to a more circular system, trying to give back resources. So use just the resources we need and go back to the origins and trying to close this circle. This is a fresh egg from our farm. We serve it at the restaurant, and it is an example of this circular cuisine that we try to work with. We serve it together with some vegetables that we grow in our garden, in our vegetable garden there in Bianya. A vegetable garden in which we work with permaculture, biodynamics, green agriculture, and we try to use a system with biodiversity, resilience. We have our own hen farm, a mobile farm, and what we do is we move it around periodically, and then hens, aside from consuming their eggs, they fertilize the land, they eat plagues, and this is very positive. And this, the past month was very nice. Michel Pras came to eat at a restaurant. We showed him the vegetable garden. He was taking pictures of the hens and the hen farm, and I was crying. It was so emotional. He's a master, and I admire him so much. And the fact that he was surprised by our hen farm was amazing, and it helps us close the cycle of the restaurant. And then it is also very important that all waste, for example, carrot peels, the potato peels of the carrots and potatoes that we use come back to the vegetable garden in the form of compost, and the China is made by artisans in the area. It's clay, and it helps us convey the importance and the awareness. We think it's a responsibility that we chefs and waiters have when cooking and serving our dishes.
So this is the hen farm that we have, the importance of the products that they are eating. And, so we try to achieve this total circularity because we want to use the waste as a resource and giving it new life. And this would be beautiful, right? But we don't want you to think that it's something abstract. Not at all. We want it to reflect it on the planet, so that it's linked to the life cycle. This is a poster of Paul d'Avignon. It is historic biologist from Belgium, and he explains how complex the ecosystem is, and we use it to present a new concept in Lescos of an organic orchard. We focus on the importance of vegetables and in life as a whole, plants and animals that we have in the orchard. Now you'll see a video. It's not finished though, but it represents where we're going and where we want to go. It was recorded with Alba Bairuela in analogic format. She's a good friend of ours, an artist, and the idea was to do something without needing to introduce anything. It was just because we wanted to convey what we were doing, and we did it in analogic because we wanted to have this length of this maximum of 3 minutes length that we have in this type of format, and then it cannot be erased. it cannot be repeated, and we thought it was going to be something romantic, beautiful. Here you can see the compost. And we think that in the society we live in, every time more we're used to the immediate things and such on. So these, we have to wait till 1 month to receive the first images. And it can seem something from the past, but to us it's related to the future. And then here we have Accelerator, these are the utensils we use in the kitchen, and we wanted just to represent what they do. This is the kitchen with a lot of natural light. It's very important to see how the seasons go by and be in contact with nature. This is the country house of the 15th century where my mother was born. My granny still lives there. This gives us a lot of strength. This is Piñero, where we have the orchard. And this is the aperitif we serve, and we serve a very veggie. And we change it depending on the seasonality. And this is a bunch of herbs and flowers. We also recommend it to grab it and eat it. And then the buckwheat, wheat, and other types of cereals that have been recovered and give some identity. This is the buckwheat that is autochthonous from La Garrocha region, and this painting that links us to the culture and to our history. And with this product we make flour. We also make a beer out of this buckwheat. These are the birds. It's very important to us, the biodiversity, and we are trying to help boost it, and we do it in our orchard. And we abandoned some products so that these birds can feed, can eat this, and we want to have them present. We also build some nests for them to help their reproduction. And then we like to use just one product in a plate so that we can discover the essence. And it's like going to basics, using few colors and few ingredients. Here it's just the boletus, cooked in different ways. And sheep from a breed in our region. And it is a genetic pool to prevent their extinction. And we use their milk. And this is lamb. We try to do this circle. We put representing different herbs, rosemary. We make a gelée with rosemary, and then the wool representing the wool of the sheep, right? So it's all the ingredients are related or make us think of the sheep. And every one of the species, plant species and animal species, the sheep, for example, they help to create these open spaces when they graze. So it's very important for the landscape and also to increase the biodiversity of this place. And in this case, for example, leaving these spaces open, we have seen that we have a lot of partridge, and in La Garrocha there is a lot of pork and a lot of meat, so fish is only eaten when it's a party or a festival, so we don't have an ocean. So we try to cook fish comes from the river, because we only have river. So this is our lettuce that is cooked, it's braised, it's grilled. During the pandemic, we also reflected upon many things, and we could do some research in preserves. We had a lot of products in the orchard that was not being used, so we preserved it in vinegar, alcohol, liquor type preserves, and here we have all these preserves. And this is our dessert with raspberries and the flour. And this is our champagne that we do with elderberry. The elderberry has a lot of functionalities, and it also helps us to favor the presence of butterflies or ladybirds, these beautiful bee and bumblebees. They are also important when pollination. So we are planting the flowers in a staged way, so that the insects have flowers all year round, and also a place to look for shelter. And we have a lot of blackberries, and we do a lot of blackberry liqueur. And it is difficult to find young people collecting these wild plants and wild berries in this case. And so we pay tribute to this fruit. And we like to use vegetables for our dessert. And we have this white aubergine with coffee and honey. And this is a support made of wood. It's, I said before that it's manufactured in Tortellà region, so it's like creating a log or a branch, and we put some petit fours on the top with herbs and flowers from the region, in using products from our orchard. This is the research and development part of the orchard, and we treat it as a garden. It's not only obtaining goods from it, but also equity. And we've seen that for our dishes and our project, it's like going back to basics, to nature, connecting with the seasons of nature. And here in the orchard, we are like architects of this space, because it's important how we grow things, and it's a way to express ourselves. And it is also a moment of reflection, and we try to think that we are together with the orchard, not in the orchard. And I'm going to finish with a video, which is a reflection of the team, because they are in the restaurant. We consider ourselves as the second family. So we want the origin of everything that we eat, what we breathe, what we touch, everything that allows us to live the way we're living. And why do we complicate our lives? If everything is so simple as taking care of the things surrounding us, giving life to us, a small action in time can seem that it's not important, no significance, but we have to add all the actions in our life. We need to change the relationship with the land and to feel it as our home. Radical change of the perception of the land and treating it as a living being. The moment is now. Oh yeah.
Pues muchas gracias, Martina.
Oh, thank you very much, Martina. As I said, the restaurant is a paradise. So this back to basics, to the naked cuisine, I would say. I hope you continue this project for many, many, many more years to come. And talking about territory and about this link to your origins of the territory, I would say that it's one of the main things of Gabriel Lama, Oliart. He comes from Peru, and we've been talking before. He's an accelerator of solutions. He calls himself like that. And I said, come on, summarize. Tell me, what does it mean, accelerator of solutions? How would you define this? And they said, it's like a bridge between the different agents in our community to solve the problems that this community has. So yeah, because the protagonists of the community are the ones who know the problems the best, and they are very close to the solutions. We need to identify these solutions and amplify them and reconnect them. So Gabriel Lama is always looking for new recipes and that reinforce the creativity and the human connections, not only in Peru, but all over the world. So he studied communication and design in Barcelona, in Isaba, and then life takes you to unknown paths, right? And now he's a director of the Laboratory of Acceleration of the UNDP. The UNDP is an agency linked to the United Nations. Yeah, it's the United Nations Program for Development, working in more than 130 countries in order to eradicate poverty and inequalities. But as you said, I changed the project. I have a wide variety of projects, and after the pandemic, because when I investigated with Gabriel in order to present it, to present his project, he explained that 1 out of 10 inhabitants in Lima is an immigrant from Venezuela, and many are overqualified, and it is an emergency, so to say, to incorporate in the market so that they can get involved in the society, and we can apply this to all the society, not only to the immigrants from Venezuela. So it was a very interesting interview, and talent does not, it's not limited to a country, not at all. We can all develop our lives and our careers. When you move to a country, you need to activate the resilience, and this resilience from an immigrant, it's also the same resilience from an entrepreneur. So this is why there are these meeting points. We can reinforce these entrepreneurship activities, because this way of being resilient as an immigrant can be useful when you want to develop your own business. This is one of the experiments, actually, and one of the solutions more linked to food. I would summarize it. Although we are going to see a video through biodiversity, past nutrition, culture. Thank you very much. Well, I'm very happy to be here, sharing this time. I feel very grateful. And I want you to come with me to Peru and bring Peru to this conversation about food.
and I hope you relate. And we are talking about fixing the future and thinking about innovation and new things. And I wanted to start sharing the need to innovate without ignoring the past, the origins. And so also holding hands with the past. So I'm going, innovation is going to open our minds and our hearts and think about time in a different way, not in a linear way as we used to, in which future is in front of us and past is behind us. And then we leave the past behind us and we work towards the future. It's a way to stop the time and walking backwards. And we are walking backwards, moving towards the future. We don't know what's going to happen, but we are looking at the past and our starting point and what we left behind. So in order to go to Peru, the first thing that comes to your mind is this image of Machu Picchu. When I think of Peru, this is what I think of. Caral, the first civilization in America, 6,000 years of history, and one of the first sustainable cities in the world. Here the settlers dominated the wind to improve the irrigation systems, or the architecture of the city was a sun calendar to understand agriculture. And by means of the different cultures, we have these different layers and we can express our love to nature. For example, we have this cacao woman, this artistic project, and we have this sacred valley of the Incas with these terraced crops and lands, and the talent, the vision, the relationship and their love with nature was translated into a number of ingredients and products that are disseminated all over the world. So if you haven't been to Peru, if you've been to Peru, you have eaten it. So potato, 7,000 years of domestication, tomato, the sweet potato. We can find different varieties that are endemic from the Andes, genetic origin from the Andes, then the corn with different varieties, 6,000 years of history, also chile, ají, and also the beans of frijoles, and in Central America and in South America, in Peru. So maybe you also knew the superfoods, the kiwicha, the quinoa, the coca leaf, the cacao, the cocoa, the anchoveta. All these products reflect this diverse territory, and there are 84 regions of life that are in Peru. We call them like this, and this is expressed in our gastronomy, in restaurants that are awarded and acknowledged as the best in South America, the best in the world. And also there is a paradox with this reality. This other reality with 12.8 million of food that is being wasted. Almost 50% of the food that is produced is waste. This is dramatic if we compare it with the 4.5 million people in food insecurity, and 80% of the production is made through family farms, and the farmers, and they live in very poor conditions. There's chronic malnutrition in children who are under 5 years old, and this poverty, rural poverty situation of 45%. So this richness from diversity and human resources and cultural resources and natural resources. I'm going to explain to you what we do in our team in the UNDP about
about governance, prosperity and sustainability. What could we share about food in order to protect bosques, the agroforestry, working with indigenous communities living in the Amazonia to reinforce their value chains regarding cocoa and to improve their quality of life, and also so that they can continue with this role of guardians of our biodiversity. In Andes, we need to make of our forest our pharmacy and our pantry, and there are communities starting to develop products to reinforce these morchella mushroom to fight cancer, the sancayo to prevent cancer and inflammation, the importance of food, chinquichampin banditica to fight flu and cancer, a wide variety of products that we can use, thinking about what we eat as a way to heal us. And in the north, in the mangroves of Tundef, we are using the knowledge of the fishermen to repopulate these black shells, we call them, and they are fundamental to keep the balance of the ecosystems of the mangrove. The mangrove is like the nursery of the ocean, the Pacific Ocean. So these acceleration labs are present in 115 countries, 91 labs. So we like to experiment, to exchange knowledge, so that our experiments can pollinate between different countries through our interaction with the citizens that are starting to find solutions. So we go to where the fixers are, we learn from them, and we implement and expand these solutions in order to fulfill the SDGs. So, what are we doing? In this food systems in Barbados, we are doing digitalization projects linked to the blue economy, the ocean products in Sarajevo. There is collective intelligence and a lab to work about solutions to prevent the waste of food in Paraguay. We are talking about seeds and gender and seed and the protection. In Fiji, value chains, hydroponic crops. In Peru, we have developed different experiments about food systems, our platform to make us closer to the citizens. We are interested in knowing what they are doing in this different food chain, from the production to the distribution to the moment we eat them. And we have this startup that is digitalizing these family farms and generating very interesting knowledge about accessibility and also the voice recognition, so that they can give us reports about sustainability. We have other types of solutions, for example, using clay as a refrigerating agent when there is no energy, and something which is very inspiring, these common pots of women and men and communities that cook all together in these massive pots. They share the food. And then in the markets, we are working on digitalization projects, working with women because they are the experts on the problems of the markets. And we want to develop a moment that is going to help us to transform the country. We change the way we eat. And the idea is to articulate the international cooperation and the know-how, the public sector, and the knowledge they have about food, and also the civil society, the young people, students, in order to develop a plan that is going to be our roadmap towards the sustainable project. And as for the solutions, the acceleration acceleration labs have this map of solutions linked to the SDGs, that they are multidimensional. So we don't focus in just one topic, everything is interconnected. And also what the citizens in the world are developing and which are our solutions, innovations, ideas, and with the resilience are being implemented in order to face the problems. And the future of food is linked to the water, and in the Andes mountains we are suffering this deglaciation, and women are organized in order to measure the quality of water. Communities that practice this crop of water in order to plant the seeds when there is a drought, and also communities that do this Aini activity, this reciprocity, in which all together we are going to work on your puzzle, and then next day you're gonna work on my puzzle, and then we work in a collaborative way in order to restore this knowledge, and this improves the efficiency of the water, and these communities are organizing themselves in order to recover these projects that allow them to use the water more smartly. And the acceleration labs have made a doc. It was presented today in the festival, and you will be able to watch it through digital platforms all over the world. It is a celebration of these people who are making decisions, and if it's necessary to take waste materials to build something, we are gonna do it. Or, for example, the problem of organic waste and developing an idea of a disinfectant product for the household. So it's very inspiring. And here you have it.
La siguiente. A ver. ¿Va?
Our planet is facing sustainability challenges like we've never seen before. From climate change to pollution to social inequality, people are rising to these challenges with ingenuity, resilience, and vision.
Más o menos ya va a ser como 10 años que nos está afectando bastante.
We are not accessible world, unfortunately.
Why does the rubbish smell so much?
We have a big problem with electricity.
We have a big problem with electricity.
Where do we begin? We don't have the answers, but some might.
It's the people closest to the problem who have the most knowledge about that problem.
Mighty oaks come from small acorns, and the seeds of the smallest ideas, once nurtured, can change the world. This is the power of grassroots innovation, the power of local changemakers taking real actions to help those around them.
Emmanuel has just created Sierra Leone's first.
Emmanuel created the first solar car in Sierra Leone, which is eco-friendly. My name is Tring Thong. I'm director of a company that recycles organic waste into cleaning products.
Possible when we act as one. When we recognize great things can come from humble beginnings. When we dream together. When we innovate together. When we empower each other.
The question is always, what can one person do to save the world? An equally important question is, what do 8 billion people know?
Igualmente importante para mí.
Just as important to me, thank you.
Igualmente importante.
Just as important to me are cultural solutions. And this knowledge, these aspects of our mindset and our culture that are worthy of getting back to today, keeping one hand in the origin to guide us towards the decisions of the future and what we're going to design. And just to finish and to leave with you some of these cultural solutions, some elements of the worldview of the Andes: simplicity, return, spiral, time, going back to the origins, connection. We are interconnected, our solutions are interconnected, our problems are interconnected, correspondence, and harmony and balance, this relationship between universe and man or woman, a human being and the universe, and how they are in a balanced relationship and complementarity. If there's a north, there's a south, and reciprocity finally. Reciprocity to others, to the community, and also towards the planet, and being grateful to Mother Earth, which we should take into account, especially when we think of what we eat and the decisions we're making there. And I would like to leave, but first thanking our communities, the men and women who work our land in Peru and who feed us, as well as the entire team behind this wonderful work. And of course, I would like to thank you for our attention in a special manner, blowing a quinto, these 5 leaves of the coke plant in the 5 directions: water, mountains, thinking of these sacred spaces. And also I would like to thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you very much.
Opa.
Gabriel Lama, muchísimo.
Gabriel Lama, thank you so much. Also, in cooking, union makes strength. Together we're stronger, and if we don't work as a network, we will not evolve. Thank you. And now I would like to open a round of Q&A. If you want to ask anything to our guests, Martina Puigvert from Las Cols, Gabriel Lama. Otherwise, I can ask a question myself. Martina, in your restaurant, the architecture plays a key role. Could you tell us a bit about this relationship between architecture and how this is linked to the wonderful natural environment? For us, being able to see sunlight is very important. The restaurant is 32 years, and at some point they decided to do an architectural reform to incorporate sunlight, especially in the kitchen, where Fina, my mom, saw it was necessary for emotions and feelings of the cooks. And it's important to see nature, and not only nature, but also sunlight. And this is where it started. RCR, the group of architects that worked on the project, they went to the same school. They're from Oliart, and they always loved open spaces with very few things, uncluttered spaces, and that the importance of the space is that the leading role is not in the architecture, but the people inhabiting this space and also the nature surrounding it. So these are very neutral spaces, special, but at the same time very neutral, where the person, the food are at the center. This is why they're all these colors. We also have a very see-through event space where everything is transparent, and the color is added by the diners, and natural light in sunlight. And now a question for Gabriel, and let's see if after that someone wants to ask any further questions. I wanted to ask you, Gabriel, in Peru, for example, I was thinking now that there are very famous chefs. You have Virgilio Martinez, for example, in the famous lists that we in the press like so very much. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's number 2 in the world. and then it's disfrutar, the next one. And what is the role of a chef in all of these problems that you were telling us about? Well, first of all, as opinion leaders, sharing these types of spaces and opening up the possibility for dialogue, I think that we should all be more aware of what we eat. It is a personal challenge of mine. And in Peru, chefs, cooks are opinion leaders regarding the situation of farmers and the origin of products in gastronomic proposals where biodiversity and varieties of products are celebrated and fair conditions are celebrated. But it's the tip of the iceberg, and there's still bridges and channels to these debates. There's a lot of responsibility. Martina, what are you missing to close the loop in your restaurant? Well, there's a lot missing, and actually this is nice, because if we had everything, if everything was already done, it would be boring. The idea is to evolve and grow professionally and personally together with the people in the team, because this is something fundamental. Everyone in the team should feel like they're part of the project, should believe in it. Otherwise it's impossible. For example, when we started doing recycling very thoroughly to see what was for the lamb, what was for the hens, what was compostable, what wasn't. We have like 20 bins, and it's very important that people believe in it. Otherwise you have to chase them, and this is something that was difficult to all of us. It was difficult to become aware of all of these and see that if we want for the future to change, we have to start by changing the present. And the entire team there started with this stage of being more aware and more conscious in our work, all of us personally and as a group, and commitment. The most important thing is to believe in the project. And how many professionals who are not chefs or cooks or sommeliers do work with you in R&D in the restaurant? Now, Maria Colda Carrera Suñé, a friend of mine, she's a biologist. She's my age, and she just started this year with us, and it's very positive because she sees the vegetable garden in a very different manner. And then Guillem as well, an agricultural engineer from La Garrocha as well, who sees it in a different light as well. So we have constant fights and debates because everyone has a different perspective, but at the same time in a very similar manner. It's strange, but that's the way it is. So we, I don't know, we move faster in a direction that was not what we expected. Jesus and Miquel Macías also joined us. Miquel is a geographer my mom's age. My mom says that it's important to have people her age. It's important because sometimes we're very fast and we believe that we are going to take the world by storm, and then he comes and says, yes, you can do that, but you should know that this and this generational relay in the kitchen, in the dining hall, because my sister started who's young and my dad who's not so young, and so it's nice to see this. Well, in the end it's past, present and future. It's interesting to see how we all, with different visions, but very similar visions at the same time, because we all want a green and sustainable horizon, and we want for the project to evolve, we want to evolve ourselves. So it is like listening to one another a lot. I think we've learned how to listen to one another rather than just move forward, and listening to each other, because sometimes maybe an idea that we had was not the best, and then together we can slowly but surely build together. Gabriel, I wanted to ask you,
Tú que estás en contacto con las comunidades indígenas, en estas comunidades la mujer
you're in contact with the indigenous communities, and in these communities the woman has a very significant role in gastronomy throughout history. If you were to only assess the written information and documentation that remains, women are invisible. So, do you have any projects?
Avanzando en este tema
para un poco recuperar, ¿no?
La importancia que ha tenido la mujer a lo largo de
during the history of the nutrition of a country.
Estamos trabajando en una
We
perspectiva de
are
género que
working on
atraviesa
a
todos
gender
los proyectos.
perspective that is cross-cutting
No
in all
solamente los que están
projects,
relacionados con
cross-sectional,
alimentación,
not
sino en
only
general
in those related
todos, ¿no?
to
Los de sostenibilidad,
food, but
los
all
que tienen
projects,
que ver con participación
the
ciudadana,
ones related
gobernanza,
to citizen participation,
representatividad,
governance,
fortalecimiento de capacidades de
strengthening
emprendimiento.
entrepreneurship capacities.
Bueno, sí, hay con relación a la alimentación y a la tradición
vis-a-vis
culinaria,
food
hay
and culinary
muchos
tradition,
ejemplos
there are many examples.
y también expresiones culturales que son patrimonio,
Cultural
y en donde las
expressions that
mujeres
are
son líderes y
heritage and where women are
protagónicas,
leader and
pero en
protagonists.
definitiva va muchísimo
But in
más
the
allá
end,
de,
it goes
de-
way
del vínculo o el rol que
beyond
puede tener la mujer
the
específicamente
role
en el
of
tema de la
women
alimentación, sino en todos los
specifically
aspectos de
in
la vida y
food,
como
but in all
conversábamos,
aspects of
una
life.
colega
And as we
del
said,
festival aquí,
a colleague
es
of
un
the
tema de
festival
derechos,
here, it is a
es un
matter
tema de
of
derechos y que
rights.
atraviesa todo.
That is
Nos
all
quedan
encompassing.
2
Okay, we
minutos
have 2
exactos.
minutes,
¿Hay una
exactly
pregunta?
2 minutes. There is a question over here.
¿Ahora? Sí,
Hello?
ahora.
Yes.
Dos preguntitas para... Bueno,
Two
muchas gracias,
questions.
Martina.
Thank
Creo
you
que ha
very
sido
much, Martina. I
fascinante
think it was fascinating.
este testimonial, creo, de una
Testimonial of
institución ya
an
en
institution
España,
already in
en
Spain
Europa.
and in Europe.
Mi pregunta va más hacia Gabriel, porque
question is
esta
more
mañana
for
también se ha
Gabriel,
levantado
because this
el riesgo de
morning
que va a desaparecer
we
el
talked about
60%
the
del
risk
Amazonas de aquí a
of
2030 si no
60%
hacemos
of
nada.
the Amazon disappearing
Y
by
Perú también tiene
2030
una
if we don't do
parte
anything, and Peru
amazónica importante
has a
que es
part of Peru is in the
un
Amazon
tesoro de
rainforest
flora,
as
de
well, and
fauna
is a
importante.
treasure in terms of flora
Y
and fauna.
relacionado al
And
tema, digamos, de esta sesión,
linking to the
¿hasta
topic
qué
in this
punto se está
session, to what
protegiendo
extent
el
is
patrimonio
the heritage
de flora
of the flora being
toda su
protected
diversidad
and
en
all of
Perú,
its diversity in Peru
para enriquecer, digamos, nuestra
to
alimentación?
enrich our
¿Cómo se está
nutrition?
gestionando? Si hay alguna
And
iniciativa
how is it being managed?
dirigida
Are
por
there
parte
any
de Naciones
initiatives
Unidas para
by the
asegurarse de
UN
que
to
toda esta
ensure
diversidad se
that
mantenga
all of
viva?
this
Porque sabemos muy
diversity
poco, en
stays
realidad.
alive,
A día de hoy
because we
todavía
don't
sobre
know
muchas
very
de
little
estas plantas,
about
sus
these
efectos
plants, some of
psicoactivos y
these
otros.
plants, their
Y segundo,
psychoactive effects and others.
¿qué
And secondly,
está haciendo
what
UNDP
is
o otras organizaciones
UNDP or
para
other organizations doing
asegurarse de que las plantas medicinales
to make
que se
sure that the
vienen
medicinal
usando
plants
en
that
Perú
have been
también,
used
se
traditionally in
mantengan en
Peru
manos de las comunidades
stay in the
indígenas
hands of the
y no sean
indigenous
llevadas
communities
a
and are
Europa,
not
a
taken
Estados
to
Unidos,
Europe,
a Asia para
the US,
fines
Asia
terapéuticos,
for
ceremoniales, etcétera,
therapeutic
que
and ceremonial
dejan depletos los,
purposes that deplete
los bosques
the
de Perú
Peruvian forests and the forests of other Amazonian basins. The Amazon forest is almost 70% of the national territory in Peru. We are an Amazon country, and almost 7% of the population lives in the coast. One of the main problems is the lack of knowledge about the ecosystem services of the Amazon and how connected the citizens are with what the Amazon rainforest contributes to our lives, not only in terms of biodiversity and flora and fauna, but also culturally speaking, our communities and their knowledge, as you were saying, vis-a-vis medicinal plants, for example. And anywhere else in the world, we can look towards traditional medicine, and we will see that traditional medicine takes learnings from components of the Amazon plants, fruits, etc. And the Amazon provides food, oxygen, medicine, culture. And yes, there are many initiatives to protect the Amazon rainforest. From UNDP, and in Peru we have a sustainability program which is quite thorough. We work in strengthening of value chains with the communities that inhabit these territories, and we also have a rights-based approach, protection of indigenous peoples, indigenous leaders. There's also application of technologies such as satellite monitoring of the deforesting of the Amazon rainforest, generation of evidence, vulnerability maps. A lot is being done from the generation of data and evidence to be able to accompany our counterparts in the state in their decision making. Also, citizens are doing a lot as well. There are organized groups, there are private conservation areas, there are legal mechanisms. A lot is being done. And regarding medicinal plants and traditions, in the case of Peru, the truth is that, well, I would I would be lying to you if I gave you an answer about the legislation and the way in which it's protected. We have quite disseminated cultural practices. There are medicinal practices and ceremonies that are devastating the resources, depleting the resources. And I would also like to say that it is very important not to decouple the cultural component from the use of medicinal plants. In our case, we understand it as such as medicine. It is part of a broad tradition, and society currently does not have a very active participation in the preservation of this knowledge. That's very interesting. We have to say goodbye. I'm sorry I gave a long answer. No, not at all. It was very interesting. Thank you, Martina. Thank you, Gabriel. It was a pleasure to have you both here. And we'll continue to listen to more stories here at Fixing the Future.